before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Whether you're listening with headphones, lying in bed, driving late at night, or just trying to relax, you're not alone here. If you feel like it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, when you're ready, let's begin with the first story. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 34 years old, and before last September, I'd completed 6 long-distance hikes, including the John Muir Trail and most of the Colorado Trail. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand. I'm not someone who scares easily in the backcountry. I've dealt with bears getting into food bags, lightning storms above tree line, and getting temporarily lost in whiteout conditions. I know how to handle myself out there. But what happened to me on the Appalachian Trail in Southern Virginia changed something fundamental in how I move through wilderness. I'd started my section hike at Rockfish Gap, planning to cover about 80 miles over 6 days, heading north toward Waynesboro. It was early September, past peak hiking season, so I expected solitude. The weather forecast looked perfect: cool nights, clear days, that golden early autumn light that makes the deciduous forests almost glow. The first 2 days went exactly as planned. I made good miles, around 15 per day, and saw maybe 3 other hikers total. Both nights I stayed at designated shelters, those 3-sided lean-tos scattered along the trail. I prefer my tent, honestly, but the shelters are convenient, and I was trying to pack light. On the 3rd day, I stopped for lunch at a shelter about 2 miles off the main trail, accessible by a blue blaze side path. The logbook at the shelter entrance showed the last entry was from 4 days prior. A couple from Ohio heading south. Their entry was cheerful, normal. Great sunset from the ridge. Saw a black bear around 7 p.m., but he wasn't interested in us. I ate my lunch, summer sausage, crackers, some trail mix, and was about to leave when I noticed something odd about the shelter itself. Someone had carved words into the wooden sleeping platform. Fresh carving based on the pale color of the exposed wood. The message was simple: stayed here, stayed watching. Now, people carve all kinds of things in shelters. Initials, dates, trail names, terrible poetry. But something about the phrasing bothered me. The repetition of stayed and watching rather than watched. I looked around the clearing. Dense forest on 3 sides, the blue blaze trail on the 4th. Nobody visible. I could hear wind in the trees, a woodpecker somewhere distant. Nothing unusual. I convinced myself it was just weird phrasing from someone whose first language might not be English. I shouldered my pack and continued north on the main trail. That evening I reached another shelter around 6:30 p.m., with plenty of daylight left. This one was right on the main trail, more exposed. The logbook here showed an entry from the previous night, a through hiker named Compass heading north. His entry mentioned hearing something walking around the shelter around 2 a.m., but figured it was a deer. I set up my sleeping bag on the platform, filtered some water from the nearby stream, and made dinner as the sun set. By 8:30 p.m. it was fully dark. I hung my food bag properly, brushed my teeth, and climbed into my sleeping bag. The shelter faced east, open to the forest. I lay there for maybe 30 minutes, starting to drift off, when I heard it. Footsteps. Not the 4-footed shuffle of a bear or the delicate steps of a deer. Vital footsteps. Human gait. Walking slowly through the leaves somewhere beyond the reach of my headlamp. I sat up, turning on my light. The beam cut through darkness about 40 feet before dissipating into the trees. Nothing visible. "Hello?" I called out. The footsteps stopped. I waited, my heart rate picking up. Maybe another hiker coming in late? But there was no headlamp, no light source approaching. "I'm camped here," I called out again. "There's room if you need to share the shelter." Silence. Complete silence. Even the normal night sounds, insects, distant owls, seemed to have stopped. Then the footsteps resumed. Closer now. Circling around the right side of the shelter. I grabbed my knife from beside my sleeping bag. Just a small folding knife, but it made me feel slightly better. The footsteps continued in a slow circle around the shelter, staying just outside the range where my headlamp would reveal them. All the way around the back, then along the left side, then back to the front. Then they stopped directly in front of the shelter opening. I shined my light straight ahead. Nothing. Just trees and darkness and the faint mist of my breath in the cold air. I don't know how long I sat there, knife in hand, headlamp on. Maybe 20 minutes. My neck started to ache from tension. The footsteps didn't resume. Finally, I convinced myself it had been a deer moving strangely through the underbrush, or my imagination amplifying normal forest sounds. I turned off my headlamp and lay back down, but I didn't put the knife away. I'm not sure I slept at all that night. Every small sound snapped me back to full alertness. At first light, I packed up faster than I ever have. I didn't even make coffee. I just wanted to be moving, to be on the trail where I could see in all directions. Before I left, I checked the area around the shelter in daylight. The ground was covered in fallen leaves, but near the front of the shelter, I found a section where leaves had been disturbed in a strange pattern, not scattered randomly like an animal would do, but swept aside in clean lines, and in the dirt beneath there was a partial boot print. The tread pattern was clear. Hiking boot, probably size 11 or 12, much larger than my women's size 8. But that wasn't what bothered me most. The print was only 3 feet from the shelter platform, right where someone would stand if they were looking in at me while I slept. I took a photo with my phone, though I had no service to send it anywhere. Then I got the hell out of there. I hiked hard that day, covering almost 20 miles. I told myself I was just making up for the short day before, but really I wanted to put distance between myself and that shelter that night. I stealth camped, pitched my tent well off trail in a hidden spot. No fire, no headlamp. I barely slept. The next morning I continued north. I had 2 more days planned on this section, but I was seriously considering cutting it short. Around noon, I reached another shelter. This one had a covered picnic table area attached, and several hikers were taking a break there. I felt an enormous wave of relief seeing other people. There were 3 of them. 2 men in their 50s who were hiking together, and a younger woman, maybe mid-20s. We exchanged the usual trail pleasantries. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? How are your feet holding up? Normal stuff. Then the younger woman said something that made my blood run cold. Did you stay at Kelly's Hollow shelter 2 nights ago? I nodded. That was the name of the shelter where I'd heard the footsteps. Did you notice anything weird? The 2 older men exchanged glances. I stayed there 3 nights ago, the woman continued, and I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard someone walking around outside. At first I thought it was another hiker, but they never came to the shelter. Just kept walking in circles around it. I called out a few times but got no answer. Eventually it stopped and I didn't hear anything else the rest of the night. One of the older men cleared his throat. We stayed there 4 nights ago. Same thing happened to us. Footsteps circling the shelter, sometime after midnight. We both heard it. We figured it was a bear, even though it didn't really sound like one. The second man nodded. We actually got up with our headlamps to check, and whatever it was moved off into the trees. But we didn't see anything. No eye shine, no animal, nothing. My hands had started shaking. Did any of you check the shelter platform? I asked. For carvings? They all looked at me blankly. I told them about the message I'd found. Stayed here, stayed watching. The younger woman went pale. Oh my God. When I was packing up to leave, I found something carved into the underside of the sleeping platform. I had to duck down to see it. It said, "I know what you dream." None of us spoke for a moment. Finally, one of the older men said, "We should report this to a ranger." We all agreed. The woman said she had cell service at the last road crossing and would call when she got there. The two men were heading south, away from the shelters in question, but they promised to tell any northbound hikers they met to skip those sites. I asked them, "Did anyone see what was carved into the shelter you stayed at? The one 4 nights ago?" The man who hadn't spoken much finally said, "Yeah, we saw it. We didn't think much of it at the time. Thought it was kids being creepy or something." "What did it say?" He looked uncomfortable. "It said, 'I walked with you today.'" I felt my stomach drop. The timeline clicked into place. Someone had been moving from shelter to shelter, carving messages, walking around them at night, following the same route north that we were all hiking, staying one night at each shelter, maybe arriving late, leaving early, staying hidden, walking with hikers during the day without revealing themselves. I cut my hike short that afternoon, made it to a road crossing and hitched a ride into town. I filed a report with the local ranger station, gave them all the information I had, the photos of the carvings and boot print. They thanked me for the report, said they'd increase patrols in that area, but they also told me something that made it worse. This wasn't the first time they'd received reports like this. Over the past 3 years, multiple hikers had reported similar experiences in that same 20-mile section of trail. Footsteps circling shelters at night, strange carvings, a feeling of being watched during the day. They'd never found anyone. No arrests, no witnesses who actually saw the person. Just the pattern of reports, all describing the same thing. The ranger I spoke with, older guy, probably close to retirement, told me something off the record as I was leaving. "We did find one thing," he said, "about 8 months ago. There's an old fire tower about half a mile off trail in that area. Hasn't been manned in 20 years. When we checked it after receiving another report, we found evidence someone had been living up there. Sleeping bag, food wrappers, binoculars, and a notebook." "What was in the notebook?" I asked. He hesitated. Descriptions of hikers. What they were wearing, what time they arrived at shelters, what they ate for dinner, whether they snored. Dozens of entries going back months, all written in the same handwriting. Very detailed observations. "Did you?" "We staked it out for 2 weeks. Nobody came back. Whoever it was, they knew we'd found it." I left town the next day and drove home. I haven't been back to the Appalachian Trail since. But sometimes, when I'm hiking anywhere now, I'll get this feeling between my shoulder blades, like someone's eyes on me. And I'll turn around and scan the forest, and of course there's never anyone there. But I think about those notebook entries, all those hikers who were being watched and never knew it. And I wonder how many times I was written about, described in detail, observed from a distance I never would have noticed. The worst part is the question I can't answer. What was the person doing with all that information? What was the point of watching, of following, of circling shelters at night? The ranger told me one more thing before I left. He said, "In all the reports we've received, nobody's ever been hurt. Nothing stolen, no confrontations, no assaults. Whoever this is, they just watch. That's all they do." Somehow, that doesn't make me feel any better. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 41 years old and I work as a software engineer in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm telling you this up front because what I'm about to describe sounds insane, and I need you to know that I'm a rational person. I troubleshoot problems for a living. I deal in logic and evidence, but I don't have a logical explanation for what happened on the Appalachian Trail last spring. I'm not an experienced backpacker. The AT was actually my first multi-day hiking trip. I'd been going through a rough divorce, needed to clear my head, and several friends suggested I try a section hike. Therapeutic, they said. Good way to process things. I planned a modest 4-day trip in northern Georgia, from Neal's Gap to Unicoi Gap, about 30 miles total, well within my capability as someone who stays in decent shape. I bought all the right gear, watched countless YouTube videos about bear bags and water filtration, and set out on a Thursday in late April. The first day was harder than I expected. My pack was too heavy and I'd made several rookie mistakes, but I felt good, accomplished. The weather was perfect, the dogwoods were blooming, and the forest was beautiful in that fresh spring green way that makes you feel like the world is renewing itself. I spent that first night at Blood Mountain Shelter, which despite the ominous name is just a stone building at the summit. There were 4 other hikers there, all through hikers heading north. They were friendly, gave me some tips on reducing pack weight, and we all signed the shelter register before bed. If you're not familiar with them, trail registers are basically notebooks left in shelters where hikers can write entries when they pass through, where they're headed, trail conditions, whatever. Some people write poetry, some draw pictures, some just put their trail name and the date. It's a tradition. That night in the Blood Mountain Shelter, I read through some of the recent entries by headlamp before sleep. Typical stuff. Great views from the summit. My feet are destroyed but spirits high. Shout out to Trail Magic Mike who gave me a Coke at Woody Gap. There was one entry that struck me as odd though. It was dated 3 days prior, and all it said was, "To whoever is reading this on April 24th, I'm sorry for what you're about to experience." April 24th was the next day, the day I'd be hiking alone from Blood Mountain to the next shelter. I assumed it was someone being dramatic about a difficult section of trail. Maybe there was a particularly steep climb or bad water source. I didn't think much more about it. The next morning, the other hikers left early. Through hikers keep a much faster pace than section hikers like me. I ate breakfast, packed up, signed the register with something generic like Marcus, Day 2, headed to Cow Rock, and started hiking around 8 a.m. It was a Friday. The trail was empty. I didn't see another person all morning. Around 11 a.m. I stopped for a snack break at a gap with views of the valley below. While I was sitting there, I decided to check the guide app on my phone. I'd downloaded offline maps before the trip. That's when I noticed something strange. According to my GPS location, I was about 6 miles from Blood Mountain, but according to my map, I should have only been about 4 miles from it. I'd been hiking for 3 hours at a steady pace. There was no way I'd covered 6 miles. I figured it was a GPS glitch. Happens in heavy tree cover sometimes. I kept hiking. Another hour passed. I reached a small creek and stopped to filter water. While I was waiting for my bottle to fill, I checked the app again. Now it showed I was 8 miles from Blood Mountain, but I'd only been hiking 4 hours. Even accounting for terrain, I couldn't have covered 8 miles in that time. I looked at the trail around me. Nothing seemed wrong. The white blazes marking the AT were right where they should be, painted on trees every 100 feet or so. The trail itself matched my map, a narrow footpath winding through hardwood forest, but according to my GPS, I was somewhere I shouldn't be. I told myself the GPS was definitely malfunctioning. I'd just follow the white blazes and trust the physical trail markers. Technology fails, painted blazes don't, except I started noticing that the blazes seemed off. The standard AT blaze is a white rectangle, 2 inches wide and 6 inches tall. Very consistent, but the blazes I was following now seemed slightly different. Some were too wide, others too narrow. The paint looked fresher than it should, like someone had recently repainted them. I stopped at the next blaze and examined it closely. The paint was definitely fresh. I could smell it faintly. And when I looked at the tree trunk more carefully, I could see an older, faded blaze underneath. Someone had painted over the original. My unease was building into something closer to fear. I pulled out my paper map and tried to orient myself using terrain features. There should be a ridge to my east, a valley to my west, but when I looked around, everything seemed flipped. The ridge was on my west, the valley on my east. That's when I realized I was going the wrong direction. Somehow I'd gotten turned around completely. I was hiking south instead of north, but that was impossible. I'd been following the blazes continuously. I hadn't left the trail. There'd been no intersections where I could have made a wrong turn. I stood there trying to make sense of it. The only explanation was that I'd somehow, without noticing, turned 180 degrees and started walking back the way I came. Fine. I turned around and started hiking north again, back toward where I should be going. Within 20 minutes I reached a shelter. It was Blood Mountain Shelter. The same stone building I'd left that morning, 5 hours ago. I checked my watch. 1:15 p.m. I'd been hiking for over 5 hours, and I was back where I started. My hands were shaking as I dropped my pack and sat down on the stone wall. This didn't make sense. It violated basic geography. Even if I'd somehow turned around without noticing, I should have been hours south of Blood Mountain by now, not back at it. I went inside the shelter and grabbed the register, flipping to the most recent entries. The last entry was mine from that morning. Marcus, Day 2, headed to Cow Rock. But underneath it, in different handwriting, was a new entry that hadn't been there before. Marcus, you need to stop hiking. Turn around and go back to Neal's Gap. Don't continue north. This is your last warning. The entry was dated April 24th, today, and time-stamped 1:00 p.m., def 15 minutes ago. Someone had been in this shelter writing in the register 15 minutes before I arrived, but I hadn't seen anyone on the trail. I grabbed my pack and basically ran out of the shelter, back toward the trail. I didn't know what was happening, if this was some elaborate prank or if I was having some kind of mental break, but I knew I needed to be around other people. I started hiking north again, moving as fast as I could. The trail felt wrong. I can't explain it better than that. The trees looked the same, the path looked the same, but something about the quality of light or the sound of wind or the smell of earth was just wrong. After 45 minutes I came to another shelter. It was Blood Mountain Shelter. Third time, I didn't go inside. I stood on the trail and yelled, "What the fuck is happening?" My voice echoed off the stone building and died in the trees. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl from inside the shelter. Someone was crying, soft, quiet crying. A woman's voice. I approached slowly. "Hello? Are you okay? Do you need help?" The crying stopped. Sighed. I stepped into the shelter entrance and looked inside. Upnu. Nobody there, but the register was open on the wooden platform and there was a new entry. "Marcus, please. You have to leave. It's not safe for you here. We can't hold it back much longer." I backed out of the shelter and looked around wildly. The forest was absolutely silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. I made a decision. I was getting off this mountain, and I was getting off now. I didn't care about maps or GPS or white blazes. I was going to pick a direction downhill and keep walking until I hit a road. I started down the eastern slope, bushwhacking through the forest off trail. For 20 minutes I crashed through underbrush, slipping on leaves, getting scraped by branches, just trying to descend. Then the trees opened up and I stumbled onto a trail. A very familiar trail with white blazes on the trees. And 100 feet ahead, Blood Mountain Shelter. Fourth time. I'm not ashamed to say I broke down. I sat on the trail and put my head in my hands and tried not to completely panic. None of this was possible. I had to be dehydrated, hallucinating, experiencing some kind of medical emergency. I drank water, ate an energy bar, splashed cold water on my face. When I looked up, there was a man standing on the trail about 30 feet away. He was dressed in hiking clothes that looked oddly old-fashioned, like vintage 1970s gear. He was maybe 60 years old, with a long gray beard. "You're stuck," he said. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "What?" I managed to say. "You're stuck in a loop. Been watching you for the last 3 cycles." "What are you talking about? What's happening?" He walked closer. As he did, I noticed that he was slightly transparent. I could see the trees behind him, through him. "I don't know what causes it," he said. "Some kind of fold in the trail, like a knot in a rope. You walk forward, but you end up back where you started. Happens sometimes in these mountains. Old places, thin places." "This isn't real," I said. "You're not real." He smiled sadly. "That's what I thought too. 30 years ago when I got stuck, I kept trying to break out. Kept walking. Kept thinking I'd find the edge of whatever this is. But there is no edge. There's just the loop. No. No, I'm leaving. I'm calling for help." I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. "They can't help you," the man said. "Nobody can see you when you're in here. You're outside normal space, outside normal time. You could walk right past a ranger and they wouldn't see you." "Then how do I get out?" "I don't know if you can. I never did. But I'm not dead. I'm alive. I'm breathing. I'm here." "So am I," he said quietly. "In a sense, I'm what's left." I looked at the shelter behind him. The register. Someone keeps writing warnings in it. Is that you? Me and others. There are a few of us. We try to warn people, try to keep them from making the same mistakes we did. Most hikers never see the warnings. They pass through just fine. But some people get stuck. Why? What did I do wrong? Nothing. It's random. Wrong place, wrong time. A step taken at the exact wrong moment when the fold is active. He gestured around us. "You're caught now. The only question is whether you can get uncaught before you fade too much." Fade? We're not meant to exist in loops. Our presence here is temporary. The longer you stay, the more you fade. First from the world outside. Nobody can see you. You leave no trace. Then from yourself. You forget who you were. Eventually you're just an echo. A whisper in a register. A voice crying in an empty shelter. I stood up. I don't accept that. There has to be a way out. He looked at me with something like pity. The only exit I know of is to stop moving, to let the loop unravel you completely, to fade until there's nothing left. Some of the others have chosen that. They just sat down and waited to disappear. And you haven't. I'm stubborn. Or a coward. I haven't decided which. I looked at Blood Mountain Shelter, at the register inside with its warnings. "How many people are stuck here?" I asked. "I've counted 9 of us. Maybe more. We don't all manifest at the same time." He shook his head. "We've tried. Doesn't work that way. The loop holds each person individually." I refused to give up. I spent the rest of that afternoon trying everything I could think of. I walked the trail backwards. I tried leaving at different times. I tried walking in complete darkness with no headlamp. I tried running versus walking slowly. I tried reciting the trail guide from memory to orient myself. Nothing worked. Every attempt ended at Blood Mountain Shelter. As the sun set, I sat on the stone wall and watched the forest grow dark. The man, he told me his name was David, sat nearby. "I had a wife," he said. "2 kids. They're grown now, obviously. Grandkids, probably. They think I died on the trail in 1994. They had a memorial service. My wife remarried. I know because I saw them once. They came to this shelter on a day hike, maybe 15 years ago. I stood 10 feet from my wife and she looked right through me. 'I'm sorry,' I said. 'Don't be. It was good to see her happy. She deserved that.' We sat in silence for a while. Then David said, 'There might be one other way, but it's dangerous.' 'Tell me.' 'Midnight. Something changes at midnight. The loop becomes unstable for a few minutes. Some of us have tried to push through during that time. Most fail. But we think one person made it out. We haven't seen them since anyway. What do I have to do?' At exactly midnight, you start walking north. You don't stop, no matter what you see or hear. You don't look back. You walk until sunrise, or until you reach a shelter that isn't Blood Mountain, whichever comes first. What will I see? The things that live in the spaces between, the things that maintain the loop. They don't like it when we try to leave. That night, I waited in the shelter. David and 2 others, a woman named Lisa who'd been stuck since 2003, and a younger man named Corey from 2015, sat with me. I didn't talk much. What was there to say? At 11:55 p.m., I shouldered my pack and stepped onto the trail. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. David stood at the shelter entrance. "Remember, don't stop. Don't look back." At exactly midnight by my watch, I started walking north. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. Just a dark trail, my headlamp creating a small pool of light ahead of me. Then the sounds started. Footsteps behind me. Lots of them. Like a crowd of people walking in step. I didn't look back. I kept walking. Voices calling my name. My ex-wife's voice. My mother's voice. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years. All calling, "Marcus. Marcus. Wait." I kept walking. The trail started to feel wrong under my feet. Too soft, like walking on flesh. The trees around me began to move, their branches reaching toward me. I kept walking. I saw lights ahead. Not electric lights. Cold blue lights that flickered like distant stars. They formed shapes in the darkness. Faces. Hands. Reaching. I kept walking. My legs were screaming. My lungs burned. The weight of my pack felt like it was crushing me. But I didn't stop then. Suddenly, the forest went completely silent. The footsteps behind me stopped. The voices ceased. The blue lights vanished. I was walking on normal trail again. Solid ground. Regular trees. I checked my watch. 5:47 a.m. ahead of me. Through the pre-dawn gloom, I saw a structure. A shelter. Please not Blood Mountain, I thought. Please. As I got closer, I read the sign. Cow Rock Mountain Shelter. I actually collapsed. Just fell to my knees on the trail and sobbed with relief. I'd made it out. When the sun came up, I was still there, sitting on the shelter platform. A thru hiker came up the trail around 6:30 a.m. "Hey man, you okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I'm okay." "You look rough. Bad night?" Something like that. He sat down and we talked for a few minutes. Normal conversation. He could see me. I was real again. Before he left, I asked, "Did you stay at Blood Mountain Shelter 2 nights ago?" "Nah, I skipped it. There was some weird energy there. Couldn't explain it. Just felt like I should keep moving." I finished my section hike. Made it to Unicoi Gap. Went home, but I can't stop thinking about David and Lisa and Corey and the others. Still stuck there. Still warning hikers in register entries that most people never see. I reported everything to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. They were polite but clearly thought I'd had some kind of psychological episode. They assured me they regularly maintain that section and have never received similar reports. But I know what I experienced, and I know there are people, or what's left of people, trapped in that fold in the trail. Sometimes I think about going back, trying to help them somehow. But David told me that if I get caught again, I probably won't get out a second time, so I don't hike anymore. I can't. Every trail feels like it might loop back on itself. Every shelter feels like it might trap me. I'm back in Charlotte, living my normal life. But it doesn't feel real. Not the way the loop felt real. And sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps behind me even though I'm alone in my apartment. I never look back.